Okay, welcome everyone. We are here to talk about Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center grants. And as a reminder, we are now recording the webinar. And my name is Katie Spring. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the communications manager here at NE-DBIC. And I'm joined by Ben Eldridge, who is the grant program manager for the Farm Modernization and Improvement Grant. And we're going to go over plenty of things today, mainly how to apply to NE-DBIC grants with a deep dive on the farm improvement and modernization. So before we get into that, I just want to remind everyone that as we go through the webinar, please keep yourself on mute. If you have questions throughout the presentation, you can put that in the chat and we will come back to that after we've gone through all of the information. And there will be plenty of time at the end to have some Q&A and to answer any questions that you have at the end. So with that, we're going to dive right in. Unless I'm forgetting anything, Ben, you can just give me a thumbs up if we're good. Okay,
I think we're good.
Great. So welcome to the webinar. We're going to start with just an overview of what NE-DBIC is for anyone who's coming to know us for the first time. So we're one of 4 USDA-funded dairy business innovation centers. The other ones are in Wisconsin, Tennessee, and California. The DBIs are, they were created and authorized in the 2018 Farm Bill, and we received an extension along with the extension of that Farm Bill as well. So right now we have funding through 2027, and we will learn what comes after that when we have another Farm Bill. Our priority is to invest in dairy farms and processors across the Northeast. We serve 11 different states, and we really work to improve marketing, production, distribution, and really strengthening the dairy supply chain across the Northeast. Through our USDA funding, we've received $53 million to put out through grants, contracts, and research. And as of December, we have granted out $33 million of our total amount. So who is NE-DBIC for? As I mentioned, we serve 11 states in the Northeast, all of New England, plus New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, and Delaware. And we have grants for cow, goat, and sheep dairy farmers. We work with state agencies, extension offices, a lot of different dairy sector stakeholders to get the word out and connect with farmers and processors across the Northeast. So that's the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center in a nutshell. And now we're going to really dig into how to apply to our grants. And I'm going to hand it over to Ben.
Thanks, Katie. Hope everyone can hear me. So as Katie mentioned, we are going to talk a little bit about upcoming grants, just give you an overview of sort of what the opportunities are for through the NE-DBIC. We'll talk specifically about the Dairy Farm Improvement and Modernization Program, which is an opportunity that's open now. And then we'll talk a little bit about strategies for applying to grants. And if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or the Q&A, and Katie will keep track of them, and we'll have time for questions at the end. So first things first, just wanted to go over our upcoming planned funding opportunities. So aside from the Dairy Farm Improvement and Modernization Grant, which we'll be talking about, we have a few other grant opportunities planned out through the remainder of 2025. Two of those programs are aimed at have eligibility for both farmers and processors. Those are our Workforce Development Grant, which is a new grant program. Um, it's based on research that we did on a consultant about the workforce development in the Northeast dairy sector. Um, and these grants aim to implement some projects in order to improve those opportunities. And we'll have more information about those grants coming up soon. We're still developing them, but there will be two rounds, one in late winter and one in the spring. We'll have another round of our Dairy Food Safety and Certification Grant, which is a grant that we've run a number of times. This grant will be open in from February to April, and awards range from $10,000 to $500,000. This round has a total of $525,000 available. As I said, these are grants that are available to both dairy farmers and processors. And the goal is to provide funds for projects that make tangible improvements to food safety or biosecurity on the farm or in dairy processing, or that allow improvements to get certifications that allow for expansion of markets. So that can look like an audit. We've been able to pay for food safety consulting to develop food safety plans. We've been able to pay for consulting to build traceability systems. It can also pay for equipment related to food safety systems. On the processing only side of the grants, we have a few other opportunities. One is our upcoming dairy co-packing grant. This is also a new grant program. This program is designed for processors who are already co-packing to expand those co-packing capabilities, or for dairy brands that are looking to partner with a processor in order to co-pack. And this grant can pay for new co-packing capabilities or for expansion of existing co-packing capabilities. More information about that grant will be coming out very soon as that RFA comes out, I think, next week. We have another round of our dairy marketing and branding services grant coming up in the spring. That grant is for dairy processors in order to access consultants to improve their marketing and branding. We'll also have another round of our dairy processor modernization grant coming up in the summer. That grant is somewhat like the Farm Improvement and Modernization Grant. It can fund a lot of different projects relating to improving the viability or efficiency of dairy processing. So, the Dairy Farm Improvement and Modernization Grant, that's what we're here to talk about mostly today. This is a grant program that funds grant projects that can benefit farms by improving dairy production with the goal of increasing farm viability, reducing climate impacts, improving milk quality or value, improving worker conditions, and strengthening farm resiliency. This grant can pay for a lot of different activities. It can pay for trialing new systems or technologies, implementing unusual management strategies or new management, improving infrastructure systems, training or upskilling workers, or more. Eligible applicants for this grant are farmers or milk buyers, technical assistance providers, or producer associations on behalf of farmers. So key there is that the project needs to have clear benefits to farms. Grant awards in this round range from $15,000 to $100,000 and require a 25% match commitment. There's a total of $950,000 in total funds available. 25% match commitment, by the way, refers to 25% of the grant award. So if you're applying for a project and requesting $40,000, then you would be required to put in $10,000 in match. That can be in the form of cash, or it can also be in the form of in-kind contributions. Applications for this grant program are open through February 20th at 2 p.m., and all applications need to be submitted through Web Grants, which is the Vermont Agency of Agriculture's grant program portal. Another round of funding for this program will be available in the fall or winter. So just something to keep in mind if you have a project that you've been thinking about that's maybe not quite ready for prime time, or you can't quite make this application period, there will be another opportunity for this grant. So this grant program is, as I mentioned, I think it has a lot of opportunities for farmers to make improvements to their farms that really enhance their long-term farm viability. It can include trialing new systems or technologies, implementing new management strategies, improving infrastructure systems, or training or upskilling workers. Those are sort of what we refer to as like allowable activities. These are things, strategies that you can use in this grant program in order to improve your farm. Projects in this grant program should take a systems level approach and show that they're supporting long-term viability. By systems level approach, we really just mean like that you are looking at your farm as a whole, and if you can show that this project supports or enhances your farm's viability on that grand scale, those are the projects we're really looking for. Also important to keep in mind that this is a good opportunity for trying something new or innovative, whether that's innovative for the region or for a farm of your scale. This is a grant opportunity where there's a little bit more space for projects that maybe you can't be certain that it's going to be really successful right now, but you think it's going to be successful, and this is the opportunity to try that. Things that are not a good fit for this grant program are repairing or replacing systems or equipment without making broader improvements to those systems. So just replacing something to get it back to the sort of full functionality without, say, improving the efficiency or making improvements that are also going to benefit your farm in other ways is not a good fit. Similarly, projects that are focused primarily on milk storage and handling without broader systems impacts, those are projects that really are aligned better with our milk storage and handling program and are not a good fit for this program. There's some overlap when you start talking about milk handling and storage that also affects other parts of the farm operation, and I'm happy to talk more about that if there are questions. Grant projects need to have an impact on dairy production. So this is not a good fit for projects that are focused exclusively on manure management, for instance. This is also not a program that allows for projects to include processing. So, besides the kind of project approach, one of the main things that we talk about with grant eligibility is expenses and costs. So, generally, the NE-DBIC has, what am I trying to say? We have restrictions on the things that we can pay for with grants. Those come to us from the USDA, so we're not making up rules in order to be difficult. We are following federal guidelines for what we can put money towards. And each program has some specific requirements, but generally we can pay for training, consulting, travel, supplies, and specialized equipment. Specialized equipment is a particular category. USDA considers any durable good with a value over $5,000 as equipment. And we are allowed to pay for equipment that is specialized to dairy. We are not allowed to pay for general purpose equipment for purchase with grant funds. So that generally means that equipment purchased under grants needs to be specific to dairy. We have a list of pre-approved equipment that we go through, and with this grant in particular, we have a list of equipment available in the request for applications, the RFA, of pre-approved equipment. It includes things like, well, generally specialized equipment includes things that are very clearly specific to dairy, some milk storage tanks, pasteurizers, pipelines, loading systems, chillers, homogenizers, other processing equipment. For farm side dairy specific equipment, it really, we have on our eligible list things like robots, milking parlors, robotic manure collectors, robotic feed pushers, and other quite a lot of other pieces of equipment. If you are interested in purchasing equipment through this grant, you should really take a look at that list of allowable equipment. And if the equipment is not on that list, then you should reach out to us to find out whether or not we'll be able to pay for it ahead of time. As I said, we can't pay for general purpose equipment. And general purpose equipment includes things like skid steers, generators, tractors. We can't pay for vehicles either. And other equipment that doesn't have a direct impact on dairy production. So again, if you have questions about that line and whether some equipment in particular is eligible, reach out to us. If we are unable to make a determination based on what we've already paid for, then we just reach out to USDA and get a determination on whether something's eligible. And that process can take a little bit of time. So it's good to do that ahead of time so that you have time to still continue filling out your application. Costs that we are not able to pay for under any circumstances are construction, including concrete work, purchase or lease to own of land, buildings, or facilities, purchase of general purpose equipment, which I just spoke a little bit about, purchase of vehicles or trailers, projects that solely support raw milk for human consumption without pasteurization, and costs that are incurred outside of the grant award period. It's important to note that, with the exception of that very last bullet point, I see I should have made an edit there. Costs that are ineligible for grant funds are eligible to be covered by your match. So if you have a project that requires construction, but then also has eligible costs, you can cover the construction with your match and then cover the eligible costs with your grant funds. The things that, but yes, I should have made an edit here. Both match costs and grant costs have to be within the grant period. So we can't cover things that you've already purchased. All right, this slide has a little bit of a sort of how to get your application together. It's a sort of an overview here. So the first sort of part of a project is starting with the request for applications, or the RFA. We post RFAs 2 weeks at least before an application opens on our website. It's a fairly long PDF document. It's about 20, 25 pages. The RFA includes all of the program details. So it includes eligibility, or eligible applicants. It includes eligible projects. It includes eligible costs. It includes funding priorities. It also includes a full copy of the application questions. That's basically the entire second half of an RFA is the application. And along with scoring criteria and application requirements like required documentation for quotes or for letters of support. So the RFA is really your first step in any application process. You want to review the RFA carefully, figure out pay close attention to eligible projects, funding priorities, and eligible costs to see if your project is aligned with those things. And then if you have questions about that, reach out to the program staff and we'll be able to answer questions about the RFA. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this particular point in a few minutes, but right now I just want to go through the next steps in the application process. After the request for applications is open, we will open the application in Web Grants. Applications are generally open for 6 weeks. In this period, sort of as you're preparing your project and putting an application together, you want to make sure that you're registered in Web Grants. That can take a couple of days if you haven't done it before, so make sure to do that ahead of time. You want to reach out to technical assistance for project planning. That means you'll hear me refer to technical assistance a few times. Technical assistance really refers to a lot of different people that your business works with for planning. It can include farm extension, it can include business planners, it could include agricultural viability planners, it can include technical resources like food safety experts or something like that. But the goal really is to reach out to those people that support your business in order to make sure that you have the planning in place to make your project a success. You also want to start work on getting equipment quotes and budgets. Most of our all of our grant programs require you to submit quotes for any specialized equipment that you're purchasing with grant funds, as well as installation services. And it's a good idea to have quotes for any consulting services that you plan to include in the grant. And quotes can take a little bit of time. So reach out for those early. Start working on your work plan. Talk a little bit more about what a work plan looks like. And reach out to folks for letters of commitment or support. Every program has a little bit different requirements for letters of commitment and support. Those will be outlined in the RFA. For dairy farm improvement and modernization, you need at least one letter of commitment or support. Letters of support generally, more than the required letters of support or commitment are generally helpful. But one important thing to keep in mind is that quality is better than quantity. So reach out to folks early who know your business and can speak to your project, and ask them to provide a letter of support, or if they're a project partner, a letter of commitment. And having those letters arrive or be attached to your application as a PDF document on letterhead with a signature, those make a big difference for reviewers. So the quality of those letters, also the specificity, and not having a kind of rote form letter from more than one person. The more they can speak to your business and to your project, the better. Then you're going to fill out your application in Web Grants. As I said, applications are open for at least 6 weeks. This application, Farm Modernization, is currently open, and it is open until February 20th. Web Grants is it's the only way to submit an application, and it is not a perfect system. It has some user quirks, so it can take a little bit of time to get used to. We can offer assistance with web grants, and there's a link in the RFA for who to contact in order to do that. But we really recommend that people draft responses to application questions in a document and then copy them into web grants. That helps make sure that as you're saving and going along that you don't lose information. That's one of the reasons that we provide all of the application questions in the RFA so that you can approach those ahead of time. As I said, reach out to the program manager, which is myself for this program, or to the web grants contact for assistance. And really important point, plan to submit your application ahead of the deadline. We get a lot of applications at that closing period, and we sometimes can't offer assistance. And we have a very strict deadline. So really, your application has to be in by that 2 o'clock deadline on the day that the application closes. After your application is submitted, our grants committee reviews those applications. Each application has 3 reviewers. We score them, make decisions based on the scoring, which those scoring criteria again are in the RFA, as well as reviewer comments, past grant performance, and with consideration to diversity across geography, herd type, size of the operation, and project type, as well as impacts beyond the grantee. And then we notify everybody. That process generally takes at least a month, sometimes longer if we get a lot of applications. We notify everyone and offer feedback to folks who do not have a successful application to help them with further applications. All right. So I'm going to go back a little bit, take a couple of steps back towards some of those first steps that that I mentioned, and talk about this kind of key point of figuring out whether your project is eligible for a grant. And the answer really depends on the program that you're applying for and looking at the program goals and seeing whether they align with your project's goals, activities, and expenses. So you want to check the RFA, read carefully that funding opportunity, and then see if that aligns with your project goals. And I wanted to walk through an example of this for a few slides. So this is sort of like the framework that we're thinking of here. The idea is, I'll have an example in a minute, but take your project and think about breaking out your activities, your goals, and your expenses. These 3 things will help you determine whether your project's eligible, and it's also really useful because they provide a really strong framework for making sure that you're covering all of the important topics in your application. So what I mean by this is activities are things that you need to do in order to accomplish your project. Steps you need to take. The real kind of parts of your project. The outline of those activities is going to become your work plan in your application. And keep in mind that in order for a grant to be eligible, you'll need to be able to accomplish all of those activities within the grant period. The grant period for farm modernization is a year. Many grants have slightly different, but they're generally about a year. The goals of your project can be different from your activities. So your activities are what you're going to do, but the goals are what the effects are going to be, why you want to do the project, what the benefits will be for your business and or other businesses if it benefits more than just your own business. An important key here is to be as specific as you can and provide metrics where possible. And then you want to break out your expenses. That's what you actually need to spend money on. And then you can, once you have a full list of what all of your costs would be for your project, then you can separate out any allowable costs and unallowable costs. Make sure that those allowable costs are within the grant and the unallowable costs are within your match, um, and align things with the budget categories in the RFA. One thing to keep in mind is that sometimes these don't line up perfectly. Sometimes you have one activity that has multiple expenses attached to it. So we'll talk through an example here. So this is my theoretical example here for a farm modernization project. The idea is you're a dairy farm, you work with a farm extension worker on farm planning, and one thing that you've identified is calf morbidity is a significant area of potential improvement for your farm. So you want to take the opportunity to try a new calf management strategy. You're looking at transitioning to a New Zealand style seasonal calving and group raising strategy. You expect that this will have significant health improvements for the animals, reducing your call rate, easing labor constraints during the haying season because you'll be shifting labor, and reduce the cost of raising replacements overall. In order to do this, you need to do a few things. You need to attend a training course to learn more about group calf management. You plan to buy a small pasteurizer unit for calf feeding and supplies for mob feeding. You're going to renovate a part of a heifer barn for raising groups of calves, and you're going to work with a veterinarian to help monitor health outcomes during the first group calving period. So, taking this example, we can then break it out into activities, goals, and expenses. Your activities are you're going to order this colostrum pasteurizer for calf feed. You need to renovate the barn. You need to receive and install the new pasteurizer. You're going to attend the training. You're going to work with technical assistants to develop the transition plan, and then you're going to implement a test group. The goals are reducing morbidity by 15%, saving on veterinary services for calves by 20%, reducing your call rate, and reducing your labor for calf management. In order to accomplish this, you have different expenses. So a big one is your pasteurizer that falls under specialized equipment. You're going to have some supplies. Again, supplies are items that cost under $5,000. Equipment is things that cost over $5,000. So you're going to have some feeding supplies. You're going to have contractual supplies with vet services, and you're also going to have training costs. And then you have all of the construction costs for your barn. Those are going to become your match commitment because those are ineligible for grant funds. So this is an example of an eligible project. So, I started with a project that I knew would be eligible, but the idea here is that you can now take this activity section that basically becomes your work plan for a grant application. You can look at the goals, compare the goals to the grant program and the RFA, and you'll see that especially the reduction in calf morbidity that you expect with this project really aligns with one of the funding priorities, which is to improve animal health. And the efficiencies that you should gain through this system are going to also support your farm in the long term. So there are long-term benefits through this project. The other thing here that this allows you to show is that your work plan and your activities is achievable and that you have the support that you need in order to pull it off. So you have technical assistance where necessary. You have a vet on board who's going to bring a letter of commitment and show that this project is going to have the support for you to be able to track those outcomes and make sure that everything's a success. Um, some general tips. Your application doesn't need to be overly complicated. It doesn't need to be fancy. The real keys to putting in a successful grant application are reading the request for applications, paying attention to the scoring criteria and all of those other eligible costs, funding priorities, and making sure that your project is aligned with those funding goals, that the description of your project and your business in your application are clear enough to people that are not familiar with your farm to understand the scope of the project. Showing us that you have a strong plan and identifying the problems that you expect to solve. A really key one, make sure that you're answering all the parts of a question. If you have answers that don't really address the question, then there's information missing from your application. Also, make sure that you're including all your required documentation. For dairy farm improvement and modernization, that means a letter of commitment or support at minimum. It also means quotes for any equipment and installation services that you want to pay for with the grant, as well as opportunities to include other documentation to support your project. Make sure that your application is submitted. You will get a confirmation when you submit an application. So make sure that you are giving yourself enough time to do that. And feel free to reach out to us with any questions. This just sort of for posterity here is all of the contacts of grant program managers within this grant program, within the Northeast Area Business Innovation Center, as well as a link to our website where all of our applications are and our grant programs are, and a link to sign up for our newsletter. I really highly recommend signing up for our newsletter. It announces all of our grant programs as they become available. It also offers insights into projects that we've funded, so you get a sense of what we've paid for in the past. A lot of those, or I guess all of them, are on the blog on the website, so you can also look back through projects there. And again, that's only a monthly newsletter. It's not going to fill your inbox constantly. Specifically for dairy farm modernization and improvement, we have a drop-in office hour planned for February 6th from 11 to noon. There are details about that on our website. It's a sort of a Teams meeting like this, but rather than have a formal presentation, it's an opportunity for you to ask questions of me in a group setting, and to learn from other people's questions. You can also reach out to me directly via email or by phone, and book an appointment if you'd like for a phone call. So that's most of what I've got now, and I'm happy to answer some questions for folks.
Great, thank you, Ben. And we do have some questions in the chat. I'm going to read out some of the questions that came in during the presentation. And if you have questions on your mind, you can add those to the chat, or you can use the raise hand function where on the top bar, just click the hand that says raise underneath, and we'll go from there. So we have a number of questions on what is allowable equipment. And So I'm going to combine a couple of those. One is just where can folks get the list of approved equipment? I did put something in the chat, but I'll let Ben answer that so everyone who's listening can also hear. And then getting into more details, one question is, are fence supplies like posts, insulators, gates, wires, etc., eligible? And similarly, could water line supplies be eligible for grant funds like tubs, floats, hardware, water lines? And could grant funds be used to pay a contractor the full cost of installing the fence as identified by the project?
Yeah. So yes, the list of allowable supplies or sorry, of allowable equipment, specialized equipment is in the RFA as it exists. And as I said, really just feel free to, if the equipment that you're looking at isn't on the list and you have a question about whether it's eligible, reach out to me and we'll do our best to get you an answer. Um, Supplies such as watering supplies or fencing supplies are generally allowable as long as they are not unallowable. So if they're not construction related or otherwise not allowable via the terms in the USDA AMS terms, which are linked in that document as well, um, then they are generally allowable. However, they also need to be related to achieving a goal that's allowable under the grant. So if you want to do a project that is that includes fencing, you have to make a really good argument about why that is going to impact your dairy production and what the impact to dairy production is. The same with watering supplies. The key as well is that we can't pay for digging or for installing underground water lines. Um, so there are some nuance there in things that can be covered by grant funds and that cannot be covered by grant funds. And even if things can be covered by grant funds, you still have to have a project that works within the grant program.
And one follow-up to that too, someone else asked about PPE, if personal protective equipment might be eligible.
Generally, as long as it's supplies, I would think so. It would probably depend a little bit on what the equipment exactly is, and again, why you would need it and how it would support the goal of improving dairy production. PPE is definitely allowable under our food safety grant program, which will be coming up soon, and that can pay for biosecurity and food safety improvements. So.
Great. I have another question that came to me directly from someone that is here. And she asks if the farm has purchased or paid for the first half of a piece of equipment, but the second half has not been paid for because it won't be due until much later in the year. Will that equipment still be eligible if the farm doesn't feel it can afford to continue to wait for a response on the grant approval cycle? So, and then the specific example being uh, the farm's buying parlor equipment estimated at $500,000. Can the farm pay for the first $250,000 before the grant application is approved or not? Um,
No,
yeah.
the answer is no. So we can only pay for things within the grant period. However, there's the the thing that we can do is um, if a grant project is approved, then we can pay for costs that are incurred at the point of approval. Um, so if you are if you really need to get started on a project and you want to use grant funds to pay for part of it, then you should wait to spend money until you know whether or not you have the grant.
And part of that question also was generally how long will it take after the February deadline to hear back on if someone receives a grant or
Yeah,
not?
it depends a little bit on how many applications we get, frankly. But generally, it takes about a month to 6 weeks until we notify folks based on the grant. Then there's another period of time where we need to put together grant agreements and get a grant underway. It's a good bet that projects will get started a couple of months after the application is due.
Great. I'm gonna ask one more question from the chat, and then I
Right.
saw someone raise their hand, but they put it down. So if someone raised their hand, we'll come back to that after. So another question in the chat is, while the work plan needs to be completed within 1 year, how does the tracking of outcomes need to be done? So someone asking, will we continue to ask for tracking beyond the grant period?
Yeah, that's a good question. So generally, you need to be able within the grant period to show outcomes of the project. So you in your application, there's a question field that's sort of like what are your project impacts and what are your expected outcomes? How will you track those? So that's your opportunity to say, this is what we expect to see through this grant, and to tell us how you're going to track those, and those things need to be shown within the grant period. Um, we write a lot of grant agreements. You probably have written fewer grant agreements. So the key is to really just tell us in the application what it is that you expect to happen and how you're going to track it, and give us an estimate of what those things look like. And to be as specific as possible, so that if you're looking at um, a, a really large decrease in the amount of labor you need on a day-to-day basis to feed your cows, say, then tell us how many hours that's going to be and what those hours mean in terms of your overall labor production, so that we get a view of that impact. We will work with people whose applications are accepted to refine those outcomes and to make sure that we're capturing things within the grant period as we can. So you need to have within that grant period, you need to have outcomes that you can show to some extent. We will ask, there are things that you are required to continue reporting on. If you purchase specialized equipment, you're required to continue. You can only continue to use that equipment for the purpose that you purchased it for. And if you do not use that equipment for that purpose and it's still valued over $5,000, then there's a continued reporting requirement that can require transferring the title of that equipment onto another user. Our job is to help you with those things. You don't need to get too in the weeds there, but we're not going to make you fill out a bunch of grant reports 3 years after your project is complete. We are going to ask you to complete reports during the grant period, and then once those reports are completed, that's when we release grant funds to you.
We've got a number of other questions too. Could you provide an example of the funding requested and the matching funds needed for the grant?
Sure. So it should really depend. It's really going to depend on your project and what your costs are. We break out grant funds into different categories: equipment, personnel, fringe, which is related to personnel, training, contractual, supplies, and travel. You break your costs out into those categories. The grant request can be anywhere from $15,000 to $100,000, and the match should be 25% of the grant request. Let me quickly stop sharing this PowerPoint for a moment. I think. There we are. And I'm going to share my screen with a copy of the RFA. Do you see that? Great. So this is one page in the RFA, and we have an example budget table here. So you can see this is an example of a full $100,000 grant request made up of $80,000 of equipment, $2,000 of training, $13,000 in supplies, and $5,000 in other shipping or whatever. There's $24,000 in cash match contribution outlined and $1,700 in applicant contribution, leading to a total project cost of $125,700.
And Ben, there's another question. I just want to make sure that you clarify the funding, like when people get their funding. Someone's asking if it's a reimbursable grant, and it is not it's a little different. So I'll let Ben explain that.
Yeah. So our grants are what we call deliverable based. That means that we write a grant agreement based on your grant application that says you're going to do XYZ, you're going to report on those things, and we disperse grant funds throughout the course of the grant based on your completion of reports showing that you have done those things as outlined in your grant agreement. This grant program disperses, sorry, I'm trying to make sure I say this correctly. Yes. 40% of the grant funds upfront. So when the grant begins, you don't have to do anything at that point. You just get 40%. An additional 40% when you've completed an interim report, and the final 20% when the final report is approved, showing that you've done all of what you were supposed to do. So it's not exactly a reimbursement-based grant, like you might be used to, where you just sort of hand over all of your invoices, but it is a grant that provides money later on in the grant sometimes.
Okay, and I just wanted to put your contact information back up there. So
Thank you.
I hope folks are seeing that. We only have about 6 minutes left in this webinar, and so I'm going to remind everyone that Ben is also hosting open office hours. So if your question does not get answered here, we encourage you to come to the open office hours on February 6th. And you can also reach out to Ben with his email and book an appointment to talk with him over the phone. But before we leave,
quickly,
go ahead.
Can I just chime in to say, I do get a lot of questions about this grant program, so sometimes it may take me a little bit of time to get back to you. Just bear with me. I do try to get through everything, but it can be especially helpful if you use that booking an appointment feature to make sure that you get on my calendar that way.
And after this webinar closes, I'll make sure that I put in the chat the link to this grant webpage. But if you already have that, these links are also there. So Ben, I'm going to just give you a few questions all at once that I know you'll be able to answer pretty quickly. One is, can you apply for more than one grant? Also, if you apply for this round and you don't receive the grant, are you eligible to apply for the next round coming up in fall or winter? So go with those two, and then I'll have one more question at the end.
So don't apply don't put in more than one application. Just apply for one grant project. Partially, that's just you really want to make sure that your grant is good, your application is good. So you should put your time and energy into the project that makes the most sense for you. And if you have questions about that, I'm happy to talk about like what comprises a project. If you're not successful with this grant, or other cases, if you have a grant with us currently, you're still welcome to apply. You can always apply for a grant that you are eligible for. If you're not successful with this one, you'll want, as I said, we'll offer to give you some feedback, and you would be able to then use that feedback. We encourage you to use that feedback to apply again. Some people are really successful with their first grant application. Other folks sometimes have put in a couple of applications with us and then they have a successful project. It really depends on the project and those applications, but we really strongly encourage people to work with technical assistance if they need help with their application, to reach out to us to answer questions, to get those applications in.
And that segues well into the next question, which is who or what are considered technical assistance providers, and specifically, can a company or for-profit company be considered a technical assistance provider? So if you could kind of talk about technical assistance for like writing an application versus people who may be supporting the project.
Yeah. So we talk about technical assistance a lot, and it means different things in different contexts. One kind of technical assistance is, as I said, farm extension workers or farm viability advisors, things like that, that you work with on a regular basis to improve your farm. They're great for planning and great for helping with projects. So and showing that you have that kind of technical assistance going into a project makes your application stronger. So if you can provide information about, like, we have worked with XYZ to improve this part of our farm, and this is the plan that we've come up with together, that makes it for a stronger application generally, because it shows us that you have that planning in place. There's also the kind of technical assistance that, as Katie was just mentioning, for applications and for submitting applications. Sometimes that's the same kind of people. Sometimes it's farm viability planners or extension workers who you can bounce your application off of, who can give you a sense of whether you're answering the questions. There's also opportunities through the small business advisor groups that every state has, through farm viability planners, to help folks with applications to grants. We can answer questions about the funding opportunity and about the application, but we can't read your application ahead of time, and we can't comment on the contents. And that's an opportunity for you to reach out to folks. I'm just going to drop a link in the chat that for the USDA Regional Food Business Centers of the Northeast, which has this new database where you can search for service providers who offer different kinds of services specific to agriculture or to dairy. That can be a great resource for looking for help as well.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us. And I know we didn't get to every single question, but again, reach out. There's still plenty of time to apply and get some questions answered. And we will be sharing a recording of this on our website as well. So thanks again. We hope you have a great rest of your day.